a quiet archive record. Tonight, we're stepping into a slow unfolding. Settle in. Let the outside world dissolve and gently descend into tonight's world. Far out in the desert, the pyramids of Giza sit like anchors in the sand. They are so familiar that the mind stops looking closely. We learn their outlines in school. We see them on posters. We watch them pass by in documentaries like a background image, something already solved. But every generation has its moment when the old questions return. Not because the pyramids change, but because our tools change. Better scans, better maps, better ways to listen to the ground without digging it up. And sometimes a scientist will say something that makes the world lean forward. A new survey, a new pattern, a hint that the stone plateau might not be as simple as it appears. A suggestion that beneath the monuments there could be more than bedrock and dust, more space, more structure, maybe even a network. In the quiet space between fact and rumor, the story grows. It becomes a corridor you can walk down in your mind. It becomes a map with faded ink. It becomes a set of doors, each one opening to a new possibility. Tonight, we will move slowly through what can be studied, what can be argued, and what people have only imagined. We will listen to the careful language of research, and we will also listen to the wild language of human hope, fear, and wonder. Tonight, we uncover the pyramid underground network. At first, the Giza plateau looks like a single stage, 3 pyramids, a sphinx, and a spread of smaller tombs. But the ground here is not a blank floor. It is layered limestone, cut by faults and fractures, and honeycombed in places by old pockets of erosion. It is a landscape that remembers water from long ago, remembers pressure, remembers time. When people talk about what might be under the pyramids, they often imagine a neat secret tunnel, like something in an adventure film. One clean line from point A to point B. A hidden doorway, a trap, a treasure. Real underground spaces are rarely so tidy. Stone cracks, water finds paths. Builders cut channels. Later builders cut more channels. Priests, workers, caretakers, looters, restorers, all leave their marks. Over thousands of years, the plateau becomes a stack of human decisions. Even before any modern instrument is turned on, we know one thing with confidence. There are voids under Giza, not a single void, many, some natural, some carved. There are tomb shafts and burial chambers, many of them now sealed or collapsed. There are workspaces and storage rooms. There are wells. There are passages connecting mastabas, the flat-roofed tombs around the pyramids. There are later cuttings from later centuries, when people tried to pull stone or search for valuables. And there are places where the limestone itself has dissolved in slow, uneven ways. So the first lesson of our journey is simple. Under Giza, space is normal. What is not normal is the idea of a large, organized network under the main pyramids. Something sprawling, something designed as a system. To approach that idea, we have to learn how scientists listen to stone. One method is ground-penetrating radar. It sends electromagnetic pulses into the earth and listens for echoes. Another is electrical resistivity, where currents are passed through the ground and differences in resistance suggest different materials. Another is microgravity, which looks for tiny changes in the local pull of gravity that can hint at hidden cavities. There is seismic survey work too, where vibrations are measured as they move through the ground. Each method has strengths, and each has ways it can mislead. A crack can look like a passage. A pocket of rubble can look like a chamber. A change in moisture can mimic a wall. And if you want to see a network badly enough, the brain will happily connect dots that should not be connected. Good science tries to resist that temptation. It asks for multiple lines of evidence. It asks for repeated measurements. It asks for careful language. But the pyramids live in the world, not in a lab. In the world, a careful statement can become a bold headline overnight. A researcher might say, "There may be an anomaly under this sector." And the next day, someone will say, "Hidden city found beneath the pyramids." The space between those two sentences is the space where our story begins. Imagine a team arriving before sunrise. The air is cool. The sand is pale. Equipment cases are carried across stone, and cables are laid down in straight lines. Sensors are placed. Screens flicker to life. Most days the results are boring. A shallow void here. A dense layer there. A crack. A modern pipe. A patch where tourists have walked for years. Then one day, there is a pattern that does not look like random geology. A line that seems too straight. A hollow that seems too clean. A repetition that suggests design. If you were the scientist who saw it, you would not say, "This is a secret tunnel network." You would say something smaller, something more responsible. You would say, "This warrants more study." And yet, inside your private mind, you might feel the oldest human thrill. The feeling that there is something still hidden. The feeling that the plateau is not finished speaking. Tonight, as we move forward, keep two thoughts together without forcing them to fight. First, under Giza, there are real underground spaces. That is not fantasy. Second, the bigger and more organized the claim, the more carefully we have to hold it, turning it slowly, checking it for cracks. There is also a newer way of listening, one that feels almost like science fiction, but is based on something simple: particles from space. High above us, cosmic rays strike the atmosphere and create showers of muons, tiny particles that pass through matter. They pass through stone, too, but not all stone equally. Thicker, denser rock stops more of them. Less dense regions let more through. With the right detectors, you can measure the flow of muons and build a picture of hidden voids. It is like taking an X-ray of a mountain, except the source is the sky. This method, called muon tomography, has already been used in pyramid research to identify voids inside structures. It is not magic. It is not perfect. But it is another reminder that the modern world has ways of seeing that the ancient world never expected. Now, when you add all these methods together, it becomes clear why the subject is so tempting. If you can scan without digging, you can chase every rumor. You can sweep the plateau again and again, refining maps, looking for the shapes that stand out. But the methods have limits. Muon detectors need time and good placement. Radar struggles in some materials and depths. Resistivity is sensitive to moisture. Microgravity requires careful correction for surface features. Seismic needs clean signals. And all of them can produce patterns that look persuasive until you test them. This is why the best teams combine approaches. They do not trust one instrument. They build a chorus. If multiple methods hum the same note, the note becomes harder to ignore. And when a note becomes hard to ignore, a new possibility opens. Not a guarantee, a possibility, a place to focus, a place where a careful future step, maybe even a tiny camera in a narrow drill hole, could turn a colored map into a real image. In the public imagination, the moment of discovery is always a door swinging open. In reality, the moment of discovery is often a smaller thing, a few centimeters of drill dust, a change in sound, a camera lens sliding into darkness, a grainy video feed, a slow reveal. So if the pyramid underground network exists in any form, the way it will be confirmed will likely be quiet. A line of data, a cautious press release, a careful statement. And then, later, when enough is confirmed, the story will change. It will stop being a rumor. It will become part of the map. Until then, we live in the in-between, because the desert has its own tricks. Heat can warp measurements. Noise can enter sensors. Data can be overinterpreted. And the story of Egypt is so loved, so charged, that it attracts not only research, but belief. Belief is not always foolish. It can be a compass. It can make people ask questions that would otherwise never be asked. But belief can also become a fog. And in a fog, a small doorway can become a whole underground kingdom, just because someone wanted it to. So tonight, we will walk with a lamp that is both bright and gentle. We will not rush. We will take the plateau seriously. And we will let the network, whether it is real, partial, misunderstood, or entirely imagined, reveal itself one corridor at a time. Every discovery has 3 lives. First, there is the private life, when only a few people see the raw data, the graphs, the heat maps, the noisy slices of underground space full of smudges and spikes. Second, there is the professional life, when the data is cleaned, checked, repeated, and described in careful terms. This life has footnotes and error bars. It has peer review. It has debates that can last for years. Third, there is the public life, when the discovery steps into the open world. This life does not care about error bars. It cares about emotion. It cares about narrative. It cares about what people already believe. When the subject is the pyramids, the public life can swallow the other 2. Let us imagine a scientist who is not a treasure hunter and not a prophet, just a person trained to measure, trained to doubt, trained to keep excitement on a leash. Perhaps they are a geophysicist who specializes in scanning shallow subsurface features, or a remote sensing specialist who works with radar and satellite imagery, or an engineer whose job is to model how stone structures sit on bedrock. They arrive with permission and with limits. They cannot dig wherever they want. They cannot drill a hole just to satisfy curiosity. They have to work with non-invasive methods and tight schedules. They collect readings across a grid. At the end of a long day, they see something. Not a clear doorway, not a labeled corridor, but an anomaly, a stretch where signals bounce differently, a region where density seems lower, a pattern that repeats at intervals like ribs. They show it to a colleague. The colleague squints and asks the first question any good scientist asks. Could it be geology? Maybe it is a natural cavity, a pocket where softer material dissolved. Maybe it is an old quarry cut filled with rubble. Maybe it is a modern disturbance. So they check other data. They check older surveys. They compare instruments. They adjust their models. The anomaly remains. At that point, in a normal setting, the story would take its time. More surveys, more cross-checks, a paper, a conference talk, another group trying to replicate. But Giza is not a normal setting. Giza is a symbol, and symbols attract storytellers. Maybe the scientist mentions the anomaly in an interview. They keep their language restrained. They say, there may be a connected set of voids. They say, we need more data. They say, we cannot confirm its nature. Then the story escapes. A headline appears. It says, network found beneath pyramids. A second headline appears. It says, scientists stunned by underground labyrinth. A third headline appears. It says, proof of hidden chambers and secret tunnels. And by the time the scientist sees it, the public life of the discovery is already running ahead, shouting, waving its arms, and turning careful uncertainty into confident drama. Sometimes the scientist tries to correct the headline. They publish a clarifying note. They say, we did not say city. They say, we did not say tunnel. They say, we said anomaly. But the correction rarely travels as far as the original excitement. Because excitement is simple. Correction is complex. Excitement fits in a single sentence. Correction asks you to hold several possibilities at once. And holding several possibilities at once is hard work. So the public tends to choose one story and stick with it. It is also worth remembering that some researchers are not careful. Not every claim is made by a cautious team. Some claims are made by people who want funding. Some are made by people who want attention. Some are made by people who already believe the answer and are hunting only for support. This does not mean every bold claim is false. It means bold claims deserve extra checking. And when the subject is a monument like Giza, extra checking is slow. The site is protected. The permissions are strict. And even when permission is granted, there are limits on drilling, digging, and access. So the public sees a dramatic claim and then sees silence. And the silence is interpreted as proof of a cover-up, when in reality, the silence may simply be waiting. Waiting for approvals, waiting for funding, waiting for the right season, waiting for the right method, waiting for the chance to be sure. This is not always malicious. It is how humans handle mystery. We do not like the phrase, we are not sure yet. It feels like a door left half open. We want the door to swing wide. So we push, and in the pushing, we often break something. Still, beneath the noise, there may be something worth hearing. Because even if a network is not a single design system, there can still be a set of connected spaces that matter. Ancient builders often cut trenches and ramps. They built temporary corridors and later filled them. They created hidden voids as part of construction logistics. Later, they built temples, causeways, and tombs around the pyramids, and those structures came with their own underground features. There are also the lesser-known realities of maintenance. A pyramid complex was not a one-day event. It had priests, it had storerooms, it had supplies, it had security, it had a rhythm, and sometimes systems of movement are hidden, not because they are mystical, but because they are practical. A route for moving offerings, a route for moving tools, a route for moving water, a route for moving people without exposing them to the heat. If a scientist finds hints of connected voids, the most grounded interpretation is not aliens or secret cults. The most grounded interpretation is human work. Yet the grounded interpretation is not the only interpretation that will appear, because the pyramids sit at the center of a long history of ideas. Some ideas are ancient, some are modern. Some are born from honest curiosity, some are born from distrust, and some are born from the simple desire to feel that the world still has hidden doors. So as we continue, we will keep the scientist in view, not as a hero, not as a villain, as a witness, a person holding a signal in their hands, trying to decide what it means, while the world gathers around them and starts to chant its favorite answers. Before we step into the most outlandish possibilities, we should visit the known underworld of Giza, not the imagined one, but the one carved by hands and recorded by archaeologists. If you stand near the pyramids, you are standing above a city of the dead. The plateau is surrounded by cemeteries, rows of mastaba tombs for officials and nobles, shafts that drop into chambers, passages cut into the rock. Some are simple, some are complex. Some were robbed long ago. Some still held surprises when opened. There are boat pits near the Great Pyramid, where large wooden boats were buried in pieces, meant to carry a king in the afterlife. There are temples and causeways. There are worker settlements not far away, with their own storage areas and workshops. There is also the simple fact that ancient Egyptians were skilled stoneworkers. They cut straight lines through rock. They made corridors and chambers with precision. They carved shafts that drop like wells. So when modern scans show straight features under the plateau, it should not shock us. But there is a difference between a burial shaft and a network. A network implies planning at a larger scale. It implies multiple nodes, multiple routes, multiple purposes. It implies that someone drew a map. Could such a thing exist under Giza? In a limited sense, yes. If you consider the plateau as a whole, with its many tombs, temples, and later cuttings, you could imagine a patchwork of connected spaces. A corridor connecting to a shaft connecting to a chamber connecting to another cut. Over time, the patchwork could become a kind of underground neighborhood. But when people say pyramid underground network, they usually mean something more dramatic. They mean a large continuous system. They mean hidden halls. They mean secret routes that run under the main pyramids like veins. To explore that idea, we have to ask what the builders would have gained. The pyramids were not just tombs. They were political statements. They were machines of belief. They were meant to be seen. So why hide a huge system under them? One answer is security. If you want to protect something, you put it where no one expects it. But another answer is ritual. Many ancient cultures built sacred underworld paths. They built symbolic journeys through darkness, meant to mirror the soul's path. Some of those paths were physical, some were text and myth. But the idea of an underworld route is not foreign to ancient minds. A third answer is engineering. Perhaps the network is not a secret at all, but a set of voids created by construction, ramps and trenches and corridors, later filled or sealed. If some sections remained hollow, they could show up as anomalies today. A fourth answer is water. Water is life, and managing water is civilization. Could there have been channels for water under the plateau? Cisterns, reservoirs, drainage? Some researchers have explored the idea that the plateau's natural fractures could have been used to guide water. Others have suggested that ancient builders might have had ways to move water for construction or ritual. It is a complicated subject because the environment has changed. The Nile has shifted. The water table has risen and fallen. What was dry once may be damp now. Still, where there is stone, there are cracks. Where there are cracks, there are paths. Where there are paths, there are stories. To make this feel more real, it helps to picture the plateau as a working place, not only a sacred place. A pyramid complex was a kind of campus. There were areas for priests and administrators. There were areas for storage. There were areas for cooking. There were areas where tools were kept. There were routes where people carried water, grain, meat, linen, incense, and oil. Not forever, but for as long as the cult of the king was maintained. And for a time, that maintenance was serious. A king was not only remembered, he was served. So the ground around the pyramids was not only a cemetery, it was an operational landscape. If you were trying to move valuable items, or simply to move supplies efficiently, you might choose routes that avoid the midday sun. You might build covered walkways. You might build shallow corridors. You might use existing cuttings and connect them. You might create a system that is not dramatic, but practical. Now think about the later centuries. After the age of pyramids, Egypt did not stop. People kept living. New dynasties came. Old monuments were reused. Stone was taken. Tombs were reopened. People searched for hidden spaces. Some of them did it for devotion, some for curiosity, some for profit. Over time, this activity adds more voids, more shafts, more small tunnels. So when someone says, "We found a network," one calm response is, which network? The ancient one, the later one, the natural one, or a mix of all three? Now imagine that beneath the Great Pyramid, under layers of limestone, there is not just a chamber, but a corridor that leads away. Imagine it branching. Imagine it connecting to other structures. Imagine it going farther than any known map. If you are a certain kind of person, this image feels irresistible because it turns the pyramids into an entrance, not just a monument, an entrance to something else. And once you think of them that way, every old myth, every rumor, every missing text, every strange alignment starts to gather around that entrance like moths around a lamp. This is where the theories multiply. Some are rooted in real features. Some are built on misunderstandings. Some are built on the fact that large parts of the plateau are still unexplored because excavation is slow, expensive, and politically sensitive. And some are built on a deeper truth. Even if we mapped every corridor and every shaft, the pyramids would still feel like more than stone, because human beings project. We project our questions into monuments. We project our fears. We project our longing for a world that still holds secrets. So let us take a breath here. We have acknowledged the known underworld. We have acknowledged the plausible ways connected spaces could exist. And now, with care, we can step closer to the edge of the map, where the ink fades and the imagination begins. There is another part of the story that often gets lost when people jump straight to tunnels. It is the part where a scientist has to decide what they can responsibly say. Imagine you are looking at a map made of colors. Red for high density, blue for low, yellow for uncertain. At first glance, a blue streak might look like a corridor, but in the next pass, you realize the streak could be a change in moisture. Then you run a second method, and you get a similar shape, but not in the same place. Then you remember the plateau is full of fractures, and fractures can guide water, and water changes conductivity. The more you learn, the more your confidence becomes specific. You stop saying, there is a tunnel. You start saying, there is a low-density zone, consistent with a void or disturbed fill, roughly aligned along this axis, at a depth that depends on the assumed material velocity. That sentence is honest. It is also the kind of sentence that dies on camera. So most researchers do not speak like that in public. They simplify. And simplification is where misunderstanding grows. If the scientist says void, the listener hears chamber. If the scientist says connected anomalies, the listener hears network. If the scientist says further investigation, the listener hears proof is coming. This is why the story often feels like a fight between experts and enthusiasts. Experts say, slow down. Enthusiasts say, stop hiding it. But the truth is that both sides are often reacting to the same thing: the limits of access. Because Giza is not a sandbox. It is a protected site. It is a national symbol. It is a living industry. It is tourism, pride, politics, and scholarship at once. That means you cannot just dig in the spot your scan highlights. You need permission. You need a plan. You need to ensure you will not destabilize anything. You need to ensure you will not damage priceless archaeology. So even when a scientist is excited, they may not be able to act quickly. And when the public hears, we need years, the public feels cheated. This impatience is where conspiracy theories take root. If you want to be generous, you can see it as longing. People long for contact with the past. They long for discovery. They long for a story that ends with a door opening. But if you want to be realistic, you can see it as a social pattern. When there is a barrier between curiosity and access, people will create explanations for the barrier. The simplest explanation is, it is hard. The most emotionally satisfying explanation is, they are hiding it. Now, let us add a detail that makes everything more complicated. The plateau is not uniform. Under the pyramids, the bedrock rises and falls. There are areas of stronger limestone. There are areas of weaker layers. There are ancient cuttings and pits and trenches. A single scan line can cross multiple materials. So when you see a shape in the data, you may be seeing a boundary, not a wall, a boundary between rock types, or between intact rock and broken rock, or between dry rock and damp rock. This does not mean there is nothing. It means interpretation is hard. Now we can ask a useful question. If there was a true underground network, what would we expect to see? We would expect repeated features, not just one void, a pattern of voids, a pattern of alignments. We would expect a scale that exceeds random geology. We would expect intersections that look like junctions. We would expect some connection to known features, temples, causeways, shafts. We might expect ventilation shafts. We might expect consistent depths. We might expect walls that reflect signals differently than natural fractures. And we would expect the pattern to persist across methods: radar, resistivity, microgravity, seismic. If only one method hints at a network, the safest position is caution. Now let us return to what we do know. The pyramid complexes were part of a functioning landscape. There were roads, there were ramps, there were work yards, there were housing areas, there were storage buildings, there were boat pits and temples, there were priests and caretakers. This means there were routes of movement. Some were above ground. Some could have been partially below ground. A corridor does not have to be deep to feel secret. It only has to be out of the sun. It only has to be out of sight. So one grounded possibility is that parts of the network are shallow service corridors. Not mythic, not Atlantean, just useful. Another grounded possibility is that the network is a chain of quarry cuts and construction trenches. The plateau was worked, stone was extracted, areas were leveled, ramps were built, trenches were cut. Later, those features were filled. Filled features can create long, linear anomalies, and a set of long, linear anomalies can look like a plan. A third grounded possibility is that the network is partly modern. The plateau has seen centuries of exploration. Some tunnels were dug in medieval times. Some shafts were reopened. Some passages were cleared. Modern conservation work has added drains, supports, and sometimes new cuttings. So if you find a corridor-like anomaly, you have to ask if it is old or recent. And the answer may not be obvious without a physical look. Now, if we are building a sleep story, we can let these grounded possibilities become a kind of calm, because they remind us that mystery does not require magic. It only requires time and layers and a place that has been lived with for thousands of years. But the human mind does not stop there. Even when the grounded explanation is plausible, we still feel the pull of the bigger story. So, with that tension held gently, we can step into the next chapter, where the network stops being a technical question and becomes a legend. There is a moment in many mystery stories where a simple claim becomes a legend. It usually happens the same way. Someone finds a hint. Someone else repeats it. A third person adds a detail to make it more vivid. Then the detail gets repeated as if it was always there. Soon the legend feels older than it is. The pyramids have collected legends for centuries. Some legends are harmless, some are poetic, some are political, and some are shaped by modern distrust. When people hear about an underground anomaly under Giza, they often do not imagine an ancient corridor. They imagine a cover-up. They imagine that archaeologists know more than they say, that governments hide discoveries, that there are rooms full of artifacts that would change history. This idea is fueled by a real pattern in human history. Power often hides information. Museums have kept things locked away. States have controlled excavations, and colonial powers have taken artifacts without asking. So the suspicion is not born from nothing, but suspicion can grow beyond its roots. It can become a single story that explains everything. If a paper is cautious, it must be censorship. If a scan is unclear, it must be deliberate blurring. If a tunnel is sealed for safety, it must be to keep the truth in. In this climate, the phrase underground network becomes a perfect seed because it can hold anything. It can hold smugglers. It can hold priests. It can hold secret libraries. It can hold machines. It can hold bodies. It can hold a history that would rewrite the world. And then the most outlandish possibilities begin to circle. Some people say the network leads to the Hall of Records, a mythical archive often linked to the Sphinx in modern esoteric traditions. In this story, the archive holds texts from an older civilization, maybe even from Atlantis, preserved in sealed chambers. Some people say the network is a map of the stars carved into stone, a physical model of a cosmic order, with corridors aligned to constellations. In this story, walking the network is like walking a sky. Some say the network hides technology, not modern technology, but something that does not fit the standard picture of the ancient world. Devices that manipulate sound, devices that manipulate light, devices that store information in ways we do not recognize. Some say the network is not Egyptian at all, that it predates dynasties, that it belongs to a lost culture that lived before the desert was dry. In this story, the pyramids are not the first layer, but the top layer, a capstone placed on a much older foundation. Some go further. They say the network was made with help, not help from neighboring kingdoms, help from something not human. In this story, the underground network is a base, a shelter, a launch point, a place where visitors watched the earth and recorded what they saw. If you listen closely, you can hear the emotional engine beneath these stories. It is not just curiosity, it is the feeling that history has been made too small. The feeling that we live in a world that has been measured and labelled until it feels flat. The pyramids resist that flattening. They stand there and refuse to be ordinary. So people push them into the extraordinary. But there is another reason these ideas stick. Underground spaces feel like secrets. A room you cannot see is a room where anything can be placed. And because so much of Giza is protected, because excavation cannot be casual, there will always be unknowns. Unknowns are oxygen for theory. Now, if we want to stay honest, we should not treat all these stories as equal. Some are clearly modern inventions. Some are stitched together from older myths. Some are based on misreadings of real archaeology. And some are simply metaphors that got taken literally. Yet even when a theory is not true, it can reveal something true about the human mind. It reveals what we wish the past could give us. A lost book, a hidden teacher, a proof that we are not alone, a warning left in stone, a promise that death is not the end. So in this chapter, we let the legend breathe, not because we accept it as fact, but because we want to understand why it grows. And because, sometimes, legends accidentally point toward real questions. Not, is there an Atlantean library under Giza? But how much of the plateau remains unmapped? Not, did aliens build tunnels? But, what would a large connected system look like in geophysical data? Not, is there a secret priesthood base? But how did ritual movement work in pyramid complexes? The legend, when handled gently, can be turned into a lantern. It can light up real areas of uncertainty. And now, in the next chapter, we will walk into the most outlandish corridor of all. Not to shout, not to prove, but to imagine, slowly, what a full underground network could mean if it existed. If you are listening in the dark, the mind can become a builder. It takes a few facts. It takes a few unknowns. And it begins to construct. So let us construct, carefully, the wild version of the story. Not as truth. As a dream the world keeps having. In this dream, the pyramid is not only a tomb. It is a node. A point in a larger system. Under the Great Pyramid, there is a passage that does not end at known chambers. It continues. It descends. It reaches a corridor cut with a precision that feels too modern. The corridor is tall enough to walk without bending. The walls are smooth. The air is cool. And the sound of your footsteps returns to you with a strange clarity, as if the space was designed for echoes. At a junction, the corridor splits. One branch leads toward the Sphinx. Another leads toward the second pyramid. Another leads toward the desert edge. At regular intervals, there are side rooms. Some are empty. Some hold stone boxes with lids sealed tight. Some hold walls carved with symbols that do not match any known script. In one chamber, there is a pool. Not a dry pit, but water, black and still. The water reflects a ceiling shaped like a star map. In another chamber, there is a platform, as if something once sat there, something heavy, something removed. In the wildest version of this dream, the platform held a machine. Not a machine of gears, a machine of resonance, a device that uses sound, vibration, and stone to do something. To lift, to cut, to store, to heal, to change consciousness. This is where the fantasy meets a real fascination. Stone does carry vibration, caves do shape sound, and ancient cultures did care about resonance, even if they did not describe it in modern terms. So the dream says, the network was built to sing, a set of tuned corridors and chambers, a hidden instrument beneath the plateau. When priests walked it, their voices activated it. Their chants traveled along the corridors like water, and in the deepest chamber, the sound became power. In some versions, the power opened a door, not a door of stone, a door of mind, a way to cross into the realm of the dead and return with knowledge. In other versions, the power was more practical. It was used in construction. It allowed stone blocks to be moved with less effort, guided by vibration. In this dream, the pyramids were not built by brute force alone. They were built with a forgotten method, a method hidden in the network, kept secret so the knowledge could not be stolen. Then there is the Hall of Records. In the dream, the hall is real. It sits under the Sphinx, protected by stone and by silence. Inside, there are shelves, not wooden shelves, stone shelves, and on them are objects that look like tablets, but not clay tablets. They are smooth and dark. They hold information, and the information is not only history, it is a warning. It says, the world has been reset before. Flood, fire, ice, disease, collapse. The hall is a message in a bottle, buried in the plateau, and the underground network is the path to reach it. Now the dream takes another turn. It says the network is older than Egypt. It was built when the Sahara was green, when rain fell where sand now lies. In this version, the plateau was chosen because it was stable, because the rock was strong, because the water table could be managed. A civilization built below ground to survive climate change. They built halls and reservoirs. They built storage. They built workshops. They built a place to keep knowledge safe while the surface changed. Then, when dynastic Egypt rose, the new kingdom built on top of the old, not knowing everything, not understanding all the rooms, but sensing the power of the place. So they raised pyramids above the hidden city, as markers, as seals, as keys. Finally, the dream goes beyond the human. In the wildest telling, the network is not only ancient, it is strategic. It is a base. The plateau is a beacon. The pyramids are not tombs, they are signals. Their angles and alignments are not only symbolic, they are functional. In this story, the underground network is where visitors lived, not gods in metaphor, visitors in the literal sense. They watched the Nile, they watched the stars, they watched humanity, and when they left behind a map under the plateau, a network of corridors that mirrors something above, a message that says, you are not the first. Now as the mind builds these pictures, it is easy to forget the ground. It is easy to forget instruments. It is easy to forget that most anomalies can be explained by ordinary things. So let us step back. Why do these outlandish possibilities feel so strong? Because they connect to themes that humans never stop returning to. The theme of hidden knowledge, the theme of lost golden ages, the theme of secret guardians, the theme of messages from the past, the theme of being watched. The pyramids are like a mirror for these themes, and the idea of a network under them is the perfect stage, because a network is more than a room. A room can hold an object. A network can hold a world. If you can imagine a world beneath the world, you can imagine anything. But even if the dream is not true, it still leaves us with a question that is worth asking softly. What is actually down there? How much have we truly mapped? What would we learn if we could see the plateau the way a bat sees a cave through echoes and shadows? Because the real answer, whatever it is, will be quieter than the dream, but it may still be strange. It may still be beautiful, and it may still change how we picture the place. Before we leave the dream behind, we can widen it, not by making it louder, but by making it more detailed, because the outlandish stories usually skip the boring parts. They skip the planning. They skip the labor. They skip the tools. They skip the risk. So let us imagine how a true underground network would have to work if it existed and if it was made by human hands. First, it would need entrances. Not one entrance. Many. Some would be obvious and ceremonial, tied to temples or causeways. Others would be hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary shafts, or sealed behind masonry that looks like the rest of the wall. Some entrances might begin inside structures that no longer stand, built of softer stone and taken apart over time, so the network could still be there even if the doorway is gone. Second, it would need ventilation. In a movie, people walk through tunnels forever and never run out of air. In reality, air matters. A deep system would need shafts, openings, or frequent connections to the surface. Or it would have to be shallow enough that air exchange could occur through cracks and small passages. If a network under Giza is real, one of the most practical questions is, where would it breathe? Third, it would need drainage. Even in a dry desert, water can enter a tunnel. A rare storm, a slow seep, a change in the water table. Over thousands of years, small amounts of moisture can ruin stone, soften mortar, and bring salt that blooms like white frost on walls. So a network would need slopes, sumps, channels, or at least a layout that does not trap water. Fourth, it would need a reason. If you build a corridor, you build it for movement. If you build a chamber, you build it for a purpose, storage, ritual, work, burial, security. And if you build many corridors that connect, you are creating a system. Systems are expensive. So the question returns, why would ancient builders invest in a system beneath the pyramids? Here, the dream offers several answers. One answer is logistics. During construction, workers needed places to move tools, to store supplies, to rest, to manage ramps and sleds and stone blocks. There may have been temporary trenches and corridors that were later backfilled, but backfilled corridors can leave signatures. Rubble has a different density than solid limestone. It holds water differently. It can show up in electrical resistivity. It can show up in microgravity. So a modern scan might not reveal an open hallway. It might reveal a ghost of a hallway, a long zone of fill, a line of disturbed ground, a scar in the plateau. Another answer is ritual. The pyramid was not only a pile of stone, it was a ritual machine. It was a path for a king, a path from life to death, from earth to sky, from body to star. In texts, the king climbs. He rises. He joins the imperishable ones. But ancient rituals often include underworld journeys too. Descent before ascent. Darkness before dawn. If there were ritual routes beneath the plateau, they would not have to be enormous. They would only have to feel enormous. A low corridor, a tight squeeze, a chamber that forces you to kneel, a sudden opening into a room where sound changes. Even a small system, designed with psychology in mind, can feel like a network. A third answer is protection. The pyramids were robbed, not once, many times. Some robberies happened surprisingly early. A network of false passages, decoy chambers, and and sealed routes could make looting harder. But again, the real world is messy. Robbers were persistent. They dug. They listened for hollow sounds. They followed cracks. They used fire and water and brute force. So protection systems often failed. Still, the attempt could leave behind a web of features. Now the dream shifts from human work to human secrecy. What if a network existed and it was not public, even in ancient times? What if it was reserved for a small group? Priests, caretakers, initiates, people whose job was to manage the boundary between the living and the dead. In this version, the network is a backstage hallway, not for tourists, not for crowds, for the quiet workers of belief. They move offerings, they move relics, they move texts, they move the small objects that make a temple function. We should not romanticize this too much. A hidden corridor can be sacred, or it can be purely practical, or it can be both. Now let us imagine a different outlandish branch, one that is oddly modern. What if the network is a data problem? In other words, what if the network is not a single thing underground, but a single thing in the mind of the viewer? Because the way we see underground data is not the way the ground is. A scan is a translation, a model, a guess. In ground-penetrating radar, a pulse goes down and comes back. The time delay becomes a depth estimate, but the depth depends on the material's properties. Change the assumed speed of the wave, and the depth changes. In resistivity, an area can look like a void because it is dry and resistive, or because it is filled with something that blocks current. In microgravity, a slight dip can mean a cavity, or it can mean a change in rock type. And in seismic, wave speeds can vary with fractures and moisture. So a network can appear when a set of unrelated anomalies line up on a map. The human eye loves lines. It loves corridors. It loves grids. Even clouds can become animals. So in this branch of the story, the network is a mirage created by the way we slice data. It is not fraud. It is not malice. It is pattern hunger. And yet, even a mirage can be useful. It can point to places worth checking. It can guide a drill. It can guide a small camera. It can guide a future excavation. Now we can return to the darkest, most cinematic, outlandish idea. The idea that the network holds a message, not a message carved on a wall, a message built into the shape of the underground system itself, like a circuit, like a diagram, like an instruction. In this story, the network is an encoded map. It mirrors something above ground, or something in the sky, or something in the human body. 6 nodes for 6 stars. 3 main corridors for 3 pyramids. A chamber placed at a ratio that matches the slope of the pyramid. A shaft aligned to a place where a star used to rise. This kind of thinking can go too far, but it also reflects something real. Ancient Egyptians did care about alignment. They cared about direction. They cared about cycles. They cared about the sky. So it is not impossible that some underground features were placed with symbolic intention. The line between symbol and function is not always sharp. Now let us imagine one final branch, the one that makes the internet hum, the non-human branch. In this branch, the network is too precise, too deep, too clean. It does not look like work made by copper tools and stone hammers. It looks like something cut by heat, or vibration, or a method we do not recognize. And the network is not only for Egypt, it is part of a global system, a series of nodes under sacred sites, a grid beneath the planet. In this story, Giza connects to other places by tunnels that run impossibly far, under oceans, under mountains, under continents. The mind loves this idea because it solves a craving. It makes the world feel connected. It makes mystery feel organized. It makes the unknown feel like a plan. But if we return to reality, we can still salvage a softer version. We can say different cultures build underground spaces. They build tunnels. They build chambers. They build storage. They build shelters. And sometimes independent inventions look similar, not because of a global network, but because the Earth offers similar problems and similar materials. Stone, slope, water, heat, security. So the outlandish stories may be too large, but the impulse behind them points to something simple. We want to know what is beneath our feet. We want to know if the past left anything for us. We want to know if our map of human ability is complete. Now, as we prepare to close, we can take the dream and place it gently back on the shelf. We do not have to smash it. We do not have to worship it. We can say softly that it is one of the stories the pyramids invite. And then we can return to the quiet work of listening to stone, listening to data, listening to the small, stubborn signals that do not go away. Because even if there is no grand underground kingdom, the plateau is still complicated. It is still layered. It is still full of voids, cuts, shafts, pockets, and scars. And as methods improve, more of those features will be found. Some will be trivial, some will be important, and one or two might be genuinely surprising. So the final outlandish possibility is not a machine or a library. It is this, that the pyramids will keep producing new questions, that the ground will keep revealing small secrets, and that the network, whatever it truly is, will remain a moving target, always just ahead of certainty. In the end, the most important thing about the pyramids is not that they might hide a network. It is that they remind us the world is deep, not only in meters of limestone, in layers of meaning, in layers of time. A scan can show an anomaly. A map can show a void. A paper can suggest a connected feature, and those things can lead to real discoveries. But even without a perfect underground blueprint, Giza already holds a lesson. The lesson is that certainty is fragile. We look at a monument and think we understand it. Then a new method arrives, a new measurement, a new angle, and the monument becomes mysterious again. This cycle is not failure. It is the living process of knowledge. So if there is a pyramid underground network beneath the plateau, it will likely be something more human than the wildest stories. A patchwork of spaces, old construction features, tombs and shafts, maintenance corridors, natural cavities, later cuttings, a layered underworld shaped by many hands. And if there is a deeper, more organized system, something designed like a true network, then it will require the same thing every real discovery requires: patience, multiple methods, careful digging if it is allowed, and language that respects what is known and what is not. But the legends will not stop. They will keep growing in the gaps, and in a way, that is also part of the pyramids. They are not only stone, they are a story engine, a place where the human mind goes to practice wonder. There is a final, quiet angle that deserves attention. Even if a large underground network does not exist, the idea of it can still influence what happens next. Because attention changes budgets, attention changes priorities. Attention brings new teams, new instruments, new proposals. Sometimes a loud rumor accidentally funds a careful survey. And sometimes, careful surveys reveal small truths that are more interesting than the rumor. A previously unknown shaft, a hidden cavity, a construction scar that teaches us how ramps were placed, a sealed chamber that contains only dust, but proves a certain method of sealing, a filled trench that confirms a workyard was larger than we thought. Science often advances this way, not in perfect straight lines, in spirals. The same questions return, but each time with better tools. Now, because you asked for conspiracy theories and outlandish possibilities, we should close that loop in a gentle way. If someone tells you with total confidence that there is a vast underground city beneath Giza, the calm response is not to laugh. The calm response is to ask, what kind of evidence would show that? Would it show up in microgravity as a broad, repeated pattern of low density? Would it show up in seismic scans as repeated boundaries that look like walls? Would radar reveal consistent reflections at consistent depths? Would drilling in carefully chosen places confirm open space? If the answer is no, then the story remains a story. But if the answer is yes, even partially, then the story becomes something else. It becomes a question with a handle, a question you can carry into the future. And that is the best use of a wild idea. Not as a belief, as a prompt that says, look again. Now think about the plateau at night. The tourist crowds are gone. The wind moves softly across stone. The city lights in the distance glow faintly. The pyramids hold their shapes against the sky. From above, they look still. From below, the ground is never truly still. Temperature changes. Stone expands and contracts. Sand shifts. Air moves through cracks. And in the deep, quiet layers, there are spaces, some made by nature, some made by humans, some sealed, some broken. That is already enough to make the mind settle, because it reminds us that the world is not a flat surface. It is a stack of hidden rooms. Now, if you are the kind of listener who wants one last image to fall asleep with, you can choose the image that fits your mood. If you want the grounded image, picture a scientist rolling cables across stone, watching a screen fill with noisy data, then circling one strange zone in red ink, not calling it a miracle, only calling it interesting. If you want the historical image, picture workers cutting a trench as part of construction, then filling it again, leaving a long scar that will confuse machines thousands of years later. If you want the ritual image, picture a small group moving through a low corridor with oil lamps, their voices steady, the corridor narrowing, the air cooler, the sound of chanting turning the stone into a slow instrument. If you want the outlandish image, picture a sealed door under the plateau, untouched, waiting not for treasure, but for a question that is finally asked the right way. All of these images point to the same quiet truth. The pyramids endure. And because they endure, we keep returning to them. We keep measuring. We keep imagining. We keep listening. And in that listening, whether we find a network or only a handful of new details, we find something else. We find a feeling of depth, a feeling that time is larger than our daily lives, a feeling that the past is not finished. So tonight, as you rest, you can hold the image gently. A plateau under a dark sky, a monument above, a silence below, and somewhere in that silence, whether in a real corridor or only in the imagination, a network of possibilities, a map that is still being drawn, a question that refuses to die. and the steady feeling that the world, even now, still has hidden rooms. And if you like, you can imagine the underground network one last time. Not as a threat and not as a promise, but as a simple shape, a set of lines under stone. Some lines real, some lines only guessed, a few lines drawn by nature, a few drawn by human hands, all of them part of the same deep landscape. The surface world will keep changing. Phones will upgrade, satellites will sharpen, software will improve, and the plateau will still be there, holding its silence. And if you ever visit the plateau in person, you can do something simple. Stand still. Let the wind pass. Let the mind stop trying to solve. Feel the weight of the stone. Then remember that beneath you, whatever is truly there, it has been waiting longer than any headline. In the dark, that is enough. Enough depth, enough patience, enough mystery, enough quiet for the questions to soften, enough space for the mind to wander without getting lost. If tomorrow a new scan is released, and it shows a void, and the headlines return, you will know what to do. You will breathe. You will listen for the careful words. You will notice what is measured and what is imagined. And you will remember that the most powerful mysteries do not need to be solved in a single night. They can unfold slowly, like sand moving, like stone cooling after sunset, like a corridor appearing on a map, one quiet line at a time. This was a quiet archive story, where the story ends, sleep begins.